travellers, and I'm here. I'm obscene in green, which basically means I'm kind of dressed up a little bit for St. Patrick's Day, which it is today. It is the 17th, it's Friday, the 17th of March. And so I thought it might be a Guinness Day today. So off we go again to sample the delights of an Irish pub and see who we may see. I think I covered this on a previous video, but if I did, I'm sorry. It's a video that's still in the editing phase, and I haven't released it yet. But this here don't look much. It isn't much, but this is the site of the legendary Rock City that was opened here, I don't know, 15 years ago, maybe, by a Swedish guy who, in the days when Swedish people formed quite a large proportion of who stayed here, but they imported top-notch cover bands from Europe. Sweden in particular, they had a fantastic AC/DC cover band in there. Anyway, it was sold on, and it opened in a different site at the other end of Soy Bangla, which wasn't as good. It was smaller, and then it was passed on to sold off to the local mafia, and they started beating up the customers for complaining that they were being overcharged and shortchanged, and of course inevitably it closed down. Good thing doesn't last forever. It had its time, but I used to love going there. I used to love going there with Sid and his brother, and she used to sit outside while we stayed inside and sampled the delights. Great place. Sorely missed by me and a lot of other people too. Well, last night I woke up short of breath a little bit and coughing. This morning I'm still coughing a bit and sneezing. I reckon, so is he. I reckon it's the bad air quality here now that we've been suffering from for quite a few weeks. Of course, the Thai government are looking for some foreigners to blame, but the people that are causing it are their own farmers up in the Isan region, burning off old growth from their land, much like the Indonesians do. When I was working in Malaysia, bad air quality was horrendous in Malaysia. Sometimes you couldn't even see the other side of the road. Very many people came down sick with it. Here it's not so bad, but this year it has been relatively bad. In fact, this is a relatively clear day today, but you know, I'm coughing and sneezing for something. I don't think it's allergies. I'm not really prone to allergies over here. From history of my life, of course, if I went back to England in the in the spring and summer and maybe autumn, I'd be racked with allergies. I was horrendously affected by allergies. It didn't start till I was about 40 years old, funnily enough, and then one summer it came on, and by the next summer it was, you know, quite incapacitating. It was like asthma for me, and I ended up going to the doctors and getting one of those puffers to ease my chest and whatever. But as soon as I left the UK and went to the States, all that went away. I never suffered from allergies in the States at all. I suspect, well, they have pollen there and they have allergy problems, but I guess you're only allergic to what you grew up with. Why it should wait until I was about 40 to appear, I do not know. So once again, dear friends, here we are. Molly's. So we're about to go in. 2 Russian girls. Come on, this is supposed to be a Russian-free zone. Anyway, you've seen this shop many times, I know. But you won't see anything inside, that's for sure. So I'll catch you later. So, here we are. I'm here inside. And now, I don't want to be too boring or too geriatric, but I've switched to the expensive lens now. And I've got it in manual focus. So, anyway, cheers. Happy St. Patrick's Day. My face should stay in focus and this will be out of focus, but I don't care. It'll be pretty good in here tonight, I should think, because a lot of people come in here at night and they'll have a big Patrick's Day party, I'm sure, but I don't go out at night. I just don't anymore. If it wasn't peak season and if the family hotel wasn't full to the brim, I probably would suggest that I'd take Tom and his girlfriend and Poi out and buy them dinner here tonight and in exchange for a free bed in the hotel. But there won't be any free beds in the hotel, so that's that. That opportunity is gone now. So anyway, here we are. We'll have a little chat. I hope you're doing well. I'm okay. And see you in a minute. Do you know that in my life I've only had 3 non-parental relationships ever? You know, there were 1 or 2 clumsy fumblings as a boy in secondary education, but that doesn't count as a relationship. The 3rd one of those relationships, knock on wood, I'm still in and have been for the last more than 20 years. But the other 2 didn't last for very long, but they lasted too bloody long as far as I'm concerned. The first one came in the mid-80s, and it was at work, and in a different section to mine. I was in television studio section, because that's what we did, but there was another section headed up by a guy called Bill Rhodes, and they were outside broadcast section. They provided all the equipment and facilities for mounting outside broadcasts and things like that. And they had offices in the same building as us, just as we did. And they had a unit secretary, just as we did. And she was a beautiful girl, my God. And I started talking to her one day, and it kind of clicked. And I thought, well, there's no chance of this, but I'm just going to ask her if she wants a drink after work. And my God, she said yes. Well, this was in the middle of my flying era. And as soon as we sat down in the BBC club after work and started talking, it turned out she was mad keen on flying for some reason or other. I don't know why. So it's obvious we should click. And I sat, and it was a foregone conclusion from that moment onwards that we were going to start dating. And you know, I remember walking on air the next day thinking that all my Christmases and birthdays and whatever had come at once, because she was knockout, stunning, almost movie star beautiful, you know. If only I'd have known then what I know now, I wouldn't have been quite so happy. And before we start, no, I can't show you a photo of her, because for reasons I will go into, any photo that I took of her she destroyed. And in the hindsight of history, I wouldn't want any bloody photos of her anyway. Although I must admit, now I would like to have a decent photo of her, because she was so good looking. But as we shall see, a lot of beauty actually comes from within. Because it soon became apparent to me that excuse me, darling, Ord was what they called in those days a tragedy queen. And she was very, very thin, and some would say scrawny. And I've told friends of mine on a number of occasions, hoping to point them in the right direction, that if a girl is thin and scrawny, she's usually thin and scrawny for a reason, and that is because she's bloody neurotic. And in Ord's case, that was so true. Well, I just happened to come in through the door at the start of her mental collapse over stress at work. I mean, stress at work, do me a favour, this was the BBC of the 80s. There was no stress at work. Didn't matter if you screwed up, someone would cover for you and you wouldn't get the sack. But no, you know, as well as being pretty well incompetent, she was kind of rushing around trying to take on all of the duties of making her boss's life easier, if you see what I mean. Trying to be his right-hand man, his confidant, everything, you know, all the things that a first-class, highly paid personal assistant would be. But she wasn't. And it was driving her mad, and she was just falling to pieces in front of everyone. And her boss was sympathetic and sent her on leave for a couple of weeks and whatever. As soon as she came back, she collapsed again. No, it turned out that she was one of these, she wasn't a girl, she was one of these women who every time a door opened for her, another one would slam in her face. I've already alluded on another video to the fact that part of the 80s anyway was a really good time in my life. My favourite was the 70s, I've already said that, but the 80s was pretty good to start with. And the downturn in the 80s kind of came with Ord, because the fallout from the collapse at work came to me as her boyfriend, and that was the collapse of her personal life as well. And let me give you an example of how bad she was. She was married when I knew her, although her husband had already decided that she was a no-hoper, and so he spent every weekend away in another house. He was quite wealthy, in another house as far away from her as he could get, which left the door and the playing field open for me. Great thing, you might say, but I do wish he hadn't, in a way. But before him, she was married a first time, and it only lasted about a week, maybe 2 weeks, when, so she told me herself, her husband packed her bag, shoved her into his car and drove her back to her father and gave her back to him because she was so desperately awful. He regarded the whole wedding as a breach of contract. My God, he must have had balls like pumpkins. I wish to God I had the guts that he had. And so it was all over to me. Why, I hear you screaming from the other end of the TV set. She's only your even relatively new girlfriend. You should have just gotten rid of her. But don't forget, in those days I was unused to having a girlfriend, and for someone in my situation that already regarded himself as somewhat passed over, it was very important. I mean, most of my friends had wives or girlfriends by this time. It was only me that didn't. And if only I'd have realised what a hell of an advantageous position that put me in. I only know now, in my later years, what a great situation that put me in, but not in those days. So at that time I thought I ought to hang on at all costs. But it was also countered by the fact that I didn't want to marry this girl, and I'd already blurted out in some kind of orgasmic frenzy that I wanted to marry her. I soon realised that I didn't, and it would be disastrous. So I had to start backpedaling from that, from a very early time. And girls can sense that. But anyway, we went on and we went on. So quite naturally, of course, she didn't get along with any of my friends. And so I didn't see much of them anymore. My whole social life shrunk down into her and me. I think this is what a lot of marriages are like, actually. And I started to become sort of resentful and angry. And all the time she wanted to go flying. I had to either take her flying every weekend or find an excuse not to. And in those days, flying was relatively cheap compared to modern times, but for a normal working man, I wasn't high up in the BBC hierarchy at that point, and for a normal working person, flying was a big chunk of your income. You regulated it. I'll go two or three times a month, but she wanted to go every weekend and whatever. And then she developed this obsession for visiting happy eater restaurants, which are ghastly bloody, let's call it was a fast food chain associated with a certain motel chain that I've forgotten right now. But so I was driving around the whole of the south of England, driving her to Happy Eaters, where she might have two of those a day or whatever. The whole thing was just driving me bloody crazy. And of course that moved over into my relationship with my mother, which was also about to crash. But I don't blame Ord for that. That was down to me. I mean, maybe Ord was the trigger that tipped me over the edge and made me have a mental breakdown. I don't know. I've never explored that possibility, and I don't have enough evidence to do it. The number of times that she messed with me and I could have legitimately just dumped her is beyond belief, but I was always presented with floods of tears and God knows what else, and I would always back off and accept her back again. Ironically, I could have got out of my marriage to Jodie with that excuse. I had it handed to me on a plate by her own father, and I decided to stand by her, and that was the worst decision I ever made. But anyway, that's one relationship further on, which I'm not going to discuss today. Sometime towards the end of this relationship, we had a long-standing plan to go on my flying club's annual pilgrimage to Barton in Manchester. And so we went, and I kind of went off on my own at night because we all knew it was going to be a boozy do, because all the aviators got together and just got absolutely smashed out of their mind and started playing silly games. And one of these silly games ended up being a human pyramid competition. And who do you think volunteered to be at the top of the human pyramid? Me. And it was all going very well until the time came to disassemble. And at that point, someone at the bottom of the pyramid decided they should just walk away. And so the whole lot came crashing down, with me having to fall the farthest. And I ended up falling smack onto the hard concrete floor of the hangar. And right away, I knew that I'd done something really, really bad. I'd severely damaged one of my knees. The whole weight of about 5 people came down on top of me and it. And I feared it was broken, but I didn't know. But at least some of them had enough sense to call an ambulance or get me in a car, I can't remember which, and take me off to the nearest Manchester hospital. And we were like drunken fools. I was in a wheelchair and they were pushing me around everywhere, making a lot of noise and whatever. Behaviour that I'm just so aghast at nowadays, but yeah, I did it as well. And in the end, I think they threw us out because we went back to the airfield, and the next day was the Sunday, and we had to fly back. Well, no one else could fly my aeroplane back for me. So Ord and I had been flying together for some time, and I'd taught her enough to be able to fly straight and level and maybe to a course, and I could fly quite competently from the right-hand seat. So we decided to set off and fly back to Southend from Manchester. By this time I was in excruciating pain. It was awful. Anyway, we carried on and on and on. I gave her directions, headings to steer, and she kept it straight and level, and I worked the radio from the right-hand seat, and together we sort of made one competent pilot. And then she decided that she wanted a happy eater, or the next best thing to it. So I was forced to land at Cranfield Aerodrome so she could go and feed her bloody face. And so she just got out of the aeroplane and kind of left me and headed off to the nearest happy eater. And I struggled out of the aeroplane in absolute agony and hobbled to catch up with her, which I finally did. And as she was sitting there tucking into her all-day breakfast, she wondered why I wasn't eating anything and why there were tears rolling down my face from my eyes. She didn't even think about the amount of pain that I might be in or the amount of distress that I might be in. Anyway, she filled her guts, and we got back in the aeroplane and we made Southend. I landed it at Southend, and I even then had to give her a lift to the bloody railway station with my broken leg so she could catch a train. And then on the way back, from the railway station, I managed to pull the car into my drive, and by that time I just couldn't function anymore. It had been more than 24 hours of acute agony and mistreatment by this bloody girl. My mother was inside the house, and I just leaned on the horn until she came out, and I explained everything to her, and she helped me out of the car and put me to bed. And the next day I got an ambulance to the local hospital, and they x-rayed me and whatever, and they didn't operate. They thought that putting me in plaster and traction was good enough. So I spent the next 2-3 months with a leg brace on in plaster and whatever. And in all that, I was off work for 12 weeks. Thank you, BBC, dear BBC, for sticking by me and paying me for 12 weeks for doing nothing. 3 months. And in all that time, that bitch never even telephoned me, wrote to me or anything to ask if I was all right. And that was the end of our relationship, my first relationship. Only 2 to go. You know, I always wondered what happened to her. So if anyone out there knows a highly strung girl whose name was Audrey Molesdale, then please let me know. Or if you're out there and somehow you're watching this, I will put your name in the data, in the metadata, so if you search for yourself, it will come here. But what happened to you? Did you get your shit together eventually? Or are you still a disaster area? You know, I'd like to know. None of it was my fault. But anyway, I thought all my birthdays and Christmases had come at once, but in the end, the presents I thought I was going to get was actually fate taking things away from me. That's the way it goes. So what are my plans for today then? Well, my plans are always notoriously open to change, but I don't think so. I'm going to have a couple of beers here, and I'm probably going to eat here as well. I fancy some. I haven't had fish and chips for a long time. I'm probably going to have fish and chips, and that will double up as my evening meal, and then I'll go home. So that's what I think I'll do. I don't really have much more to say right now. I've let you into another little facet of my life. There are more to come. I've decided that this is quite a nice format. I enjoy speaking to you about this, about long gone events that happened to me. People that know me that watch this will be very interested. I can't speak for the rest of you. If you're not interested, then, you know, I'm sorry, but you may learn something if you listen to what happened to me over the years. Anyway, that's about it for me now. If I think of anything else world-shattering, I'll drop it in here. But otherwise, cheerio and thanks for listening.
Trembling within, it's all over town, cheer down, and the smile on your face is sometimes out of place. Don't mind, no frowns, cheer down. Should fall, if your shares should crash,